I am standing in chest-deep floodwater inside a dark community building, and 18 Christian families are crowded around me, and instead of screaming, they are singing. The water is black. It is cold. It smells like mud and something else I cannot name, something that does not belong inside a building. The lights cut out 20 minutes ago, and the only reason I can see anything at all is because someone found a torch and propped it on a shelf above the waterline. It throws a pale yellow circle across the faces around me. Old faces, young faces, children being held above the water by their parents. All of them singing. I am the only Muslim woman in this building. I do not know this hymn. I do not know the words. I am standing very still, chest deep in cold floodwater, and I am watching these people sing to a God I have spent most of my life believing is not the same as mine. Then a hand finds mine under the water. A woman. She is maybe 60. Her hair is wet and pressed flat against her face, and she is shaking from the cold. But she squeezes my hand like she has known me for years, and she looks at me and says, "Aisha, Jesus is still here." I do not answer her. I do not know what to say. And then, from somewhere behind me, I hear a voice say my name, not her voice, not anyone I recognize. Quiet, clear, right behind my left shoulder. I turn around. Nobody is standing there, just dark water and a wall. I need you to stay with me for this. I know that might sound like a strange thing to say this early, but what I am about to tell you changed every single thing about my life, and I need you to hear all of it, not just the part with the flood. So if you have a minute, please stay. Subscribe if you want to make sure you do not miss the rest. And then let me take you back to the beginning. Because the flood is not where this story starts. It starts with who I was before the water came. My name is Aisha Rahimi. I am 34 years old. I am an emergency department nurse in Brisbane, Queensland, and for most of my adult life I have been proud of exactly two things: my faith and my ability to stay calm when everything around me is falling apart. In the emergency department, calm is a skill. When someone comes through the doors in crisis, the worst thing I can do is match their panic. So I trained myself out of it. I trained myself to slow my breathing, lower my voice, keep my hands steady. I got very good at it. Good enough that some of the junior nurses started coming to me when they were overwhelmed, and I would stand next to them and just breathe with them until they found their footing again. I liked being that person. I liked being the one who did not shake. At home, I am close to my mum and my younger brother. We talk every few days. They know me well enough to know when something is wrong even when I insist nothing is, and I love them for that, even when it is annoying. My faith has always been part of who I am. Islam is not just a religion to me. It is the frame around everything. It shapes how I think about suffering, about patience, about what I owe to other people. But somewhere in the years before the flood, something shifted in how I lived that faith. It stopped being something I held open and curious, and became something I held tight, mostly to defend it. I was not asking questions anymore. I was protecting answers. And one of the answers I was most certain about was this: Christians were not people I should trust. That belief did not arrive in one moment. It grew slowly, the way most deeply held things do. I heard it in conversations growing up, in warnings from people whose opinions I respected. I saw things online. I absorbed stories about missionaries who came into Muslim communities with smiles and agendas. I watched news coverage that painted Christians and Muslims as permanently opposed. And over time, without ever really examining it, I built a picture in my mind. Christians were people who hid their true intentions behind kindness. Their generosity always had a condition attached. Their warmth was a tactic. They wanted to change you, not know you. I believed this the way I believed in gravity, not dramatically, just as a fact about the world. And underneath all of that, there was something else. Something I would not have admitted if you had asked me directly. I had become very comfortable being the person who handled things alone. I would ask God for help, sure, but mostly in a formal way, in the right moments, with the right words. Not from a place of genuine need. I had stopped letting myself actually need anyone, including God. I told myself this was strength. I told myself this was what a capable person looked like. I did not understand yet that it was the most fragile thing about me. About 6 weeks before the flood, I had a patient in my ward. Older woman. She had come in with chest pain that turned out to be costochondritis rather than anything cardiac. which was a relief. And once she was stable, she became one of those patients who talks to every nurse who comes near her bed. Warm, a bit chatty. She had a small wooden cross around her neck and a well-worn Bible on the bedside table. And I noticed both things the way I always noticed these details, cataloging them, adjusting my expectations. She noticed my name badge. She asked if my name was Arabic. I said yes. She smiled and asked how to pronounce it properly. And when I told her, she repeated it carefully, like she wanted to get it right. When I came back to check on her before my shift ended, she was asleep. But on the edge of her tray table, there was a small folded piece of paper with my name written on the front. I picked it up. Inside, in shaky handwriting, she had written, "I pray that God gives you peace." I stood there for a moment holding it. My first thought was that she was trying to convert me, that this was exactly the kind of thing I had been warned about. Kind gesture, but underneath it, an agenda. I folded the note back up, and I almost dropped it into the bin beside the tray table. Almost. I do not know why I did not. I honestly cannot explain it. I just put it in my scrubs pocket instead, and later that week, without really thinking about it, I put it in my locker at work, and it stayed there. A small piece of paper I kept for reasons I did not fully understand. I would not understand until much later. Brisbane was already wet that week. We had been getting heavy rain on and off for days, the kind that makes you check the Bureau of Meteorology app more than once a day, and then feel slightly embarrassed about checking it that often. The warnings were there. They had been there for a while. But I think most of us in the city had a version of the same thought. It probably will not be that bad. I was wrong about that. I had volunteered to help staff a temporary community shelter set up in a local community hall a couple of suburbs over. They needed someone with medical training on site as a precaution, just in case, and I was available and it seemed sensible. When I arrived, the hall was already full. Families with young children, elderly residents who had been evacuated from lower-lying streets. And most of them, I noticed quickly, seemed to know each other. They were from the same church. A big family of them, 18 households or so, all arrived together, helping each other carry bags and boxes and mattresses. They noticed me arrive alone. Several of them smiled. A woman about my age walked over with a cup of tea before I had even put my bag down and said, "Are you okay? Have you eaten?" She did not ask what religion I was. She did not look at me the way I was used to being looked at in certain spaces, that quick scan, that small recalibration. She just handed me the tea and waited. I said I was fine. I took the tea. I kept waiting for the agenda to appear, the moment where someone would take me aside and explain something, where the warmth would reveal the condition underneath it. But it did not come. They just made room for me. Offered me a seat near the families with children because they knew I had medical training and it made practical sense. Asked if I had dietary requirements before they started sharing out the food. Included me in conversations without making me feel like a project. I did not know what to do with that. So I did what I always do. I kept busy, checked the first aid kit, organized the supplies, stayed useful, and then the water came. The rain that night was not like normal rain. I have worked night shifts through Brisbane storms before. I know what heavy rain sounds like on a tin roof. This was different. This was constant and total, like the sky had simply stopped being sky and become water instead. I could hear it hitting the roof of the hall in a way that stopped feeling like weather and started feeling like pressure. The roads went first. I checked my phone and the updates were coming fast. This street closed. That bridge cut off. Then the power flickered twice and went out completely. Someone had a generator in their car, but by the time anyone thought to suggest getting it, the water was already coming under the front doors. A group of people near the entrance started talking about leaving, and I thought that was probably the right call. Better to move before it got worse. I started moving toward them. Then I saw them. An elderly couple near the back wall. The man had a walking frame, and the woman was beside him with her hand on his arm. They were not moving toward the door. They could not move quickly enough. Beside them, a young mother with 3 children, the youngest one maybe 2 years old, already starting to cry because the water was cold and rising fast. I stopped. I looked at the door. I looked at them. I told the group going for the exit to go. I told them to move fast and not to wait for me. And then I walked back toward the elderly couple and the young mother and I said, as calmly as I could manage, "We're going to be okay. Let's find somewhere higher. There was no higher. Not in that building. The water had found every way in. We moved the children onto tables. We stacked whatever we could. And the group that had been heading for the exit came back, one by one, until all 18 families were in the hall with me, and the door was no longer an option. That was the moment I understood we were trapped. I stood in chest-deep floodwater, in a dark building, with 18 Christian families, and I thought, very clearly, I do not know if we are going to survive this. That thought should have made me the most competent person in the room. That is what I trained for. Chaos management, crisis response, clear thinking under pressure. Instead, I felt my hands start to shake. I pressed them flat against my thighs under the water so nobody could see. I breathed, in through the nose, out through the mouth, slow, the way I tell patients to do it. It helped a little, not enough. The water was at my chest. The torch on the shelf was the only light. I could see the children being held up by their parents, small arms wrapped around necks, small faces pressed into shoulders. I could hear the building groaning. I could feel the current moving past my legs, not violent, but insistent, like something that had made up its mind. And then the singing started. I do not know who started it. I think it was the older woman who had taken my hand earlier, or maybe it just began everywhere at once. But someone in the group started a hymn, something low and slow, and other voices joined it, one by one, until most of the people around me were singing together in the dark. Not loudly. Not performatively, just steadily, like breathing, like the most natural response in the world to standing in floodwater in the dark. I watched them. I had been prepared for many things in that hall. I had been prepared for panic, for arguments over resources, for someone to make a decision that hurt someone else. I had been prepared to manage all of that, but I was not prepared for this. For people who were genuinely frightened, I could see it on their faces, and still singing. The woman who had given me tea earlier caught my eye. She was holding her youngest child above the water with both arms, her face tight with effort. She smiled at me anyway. It was a real smile, not reassurance, not performance. She was scared, and she smiled at me anyway. A woman about 20 years older than me moved through the water toward me without saying anything and put her dry jacket around my shoulders. She was already shaking. I could feel it when her hands touched me. I said, "No, please, you need this." She shook her head. "Because you're here with us," she said. That was all. No explanation, no theology, just that. Because you're here with us. I did not know what to do with that either. I held the jacket closed around myself with both hands, and I stood in the water, and I watched these people feed the children first, pass the blankets to the ones who were coldest, hold the elderly couple steady when the current shifted. Nobody tracked what they were giving. Nobody kept score. They just kept giving. At some point during the worst of it, I needed a moment away from the group. Not far, there was nowhere far to go, but I moved a little distance from the singing and the praying, and I stood with my back against the wall, and I looked up at the ceiling in the dark. I had never felt so out of my depth in my life. And I do not mean the flood. I had worked emergency medicine for over a decade. I had seen worse in a clinical sense. I mean, I had never felt so completely stripped of the thing I depended on, which was my own ability to handle things. I could not handle this, not alone, not with training. Not with slow breathing and flat hands. I do not know how to fully describe what happened next, because I am not someone who talks about these things easily. I am not a person who cries during films or tells people how I am feeling in real time. I manage. I process later. That is who I am. But, standing there with my back against the wall in chest-deep water, with the singing behind me, I did something I had not done in a very long time. Not formally, not with the right words. I just said it, quietly, barely moving my lips. If you are really there, show me what I am supposed to do. That was it. No elaborate prayer, no list of requests. Just that. If you are real, show me. And then I heard a voice. Not the singing. Not someone moving through the water toward me. A man's voice. Close. Right behind my left shoulder. The same place I thought I had heard my name hours earlier when I first arrived. Quiet. Steady. It said my name, and then it said, "You do not have to be afraid anymore." I turned around. The wall. Dark water. Nobody there. I stood completely still. My heart was doing something irregular. I pressed my hand against my sternum, a nurse's reflex, and I felt my own pulse, fast and uneven. The singing was still going behind me. The torch was still throwing that pale yellow circle across the water. Everything was the same, except something in me was not the same. I thought about that voice. I thought about where it had come from. I thought about the woman who had handed me her jacket because I was here with them. I thought about the man who had stood in the water all night, with one hand always near the elderly couple's walking frame in case it shifted. I thought about the children being held above the water for hours, by arms that must have been burning with the effort. And I thought about that voice. You do not have to be afraid anymore. I am not afraid of water. I am not afraid of storms. Those things do not frighten me in any lasting way. What frightened me, what had always frightened me beneath the surface of all that competence, was needing someone, depending on someone, being the person who did not have enough to handle it alone. That was what the voice reached. Not the flood, not the water. That. I did not weep. I did not collapse. I am not built that way. I just stood very still with my hand on my chest, and I felt something shift. Not dramatically. More like something that had been locked for a long time, clicking very quietly open. The water level stopped rising sometime around 3 a.m. By dawn, it had dropped enough that the doors could be opened. Emergency services were moving through the suburb by mid-morning. Everyone in that hall made it out. The elderly couple. The children. All 18 families. And me. I drove home in wet clothes with a borrowed jacket around my shoulders, and I sat in my car in the car park below my building for a long time before I went inside. I needed a minute before I had to become normal again, except I was not sure I knew how to do that anymore. I went back to work. I ate meals and answered messages and went through the routine of my life, and from the outside, I expect it looked like I was fine. I am good at looking fine. But inside, I kept returning to the same images, the same moments. The woman singing while she held her child above the water. The jacket put around my shoulders by someone who was already shaking. The food passed to the children first, always the children first, without anyone having to say so. That voice. I told my mum what happened. Not all of it, not at first, but enough. Enough that she looked at me differently across the kitchen table. She said, Aisha, those people were good to you, and you got through it. But that does not mean what you're thinking means what you think it means. She was not angry. She was worried. My brother was quieter about it, but I could tell from the way he was looking at his phone, rather than at me, that he was scared. They both thought the trauma had affected my judgment. They thought the kindness of strangers in a crisis had confused me about something bigger than it actually was. I understood why they thought that. If someone had told me the same story a year earlier, I might have thought the same thing. You were frightened and vulnerable, and people were kind to you, and your brain attached meaning to it that was not really there. That is a reasonable explanation. I sat with it seriously for a long time, because I owe it to the people who love me to sit with their concerns seriously. But I could not make the explanation fit. Because the kindness had not felt like crisis management, it had felt like character, and the voice had not felt like my own thought dressed up in unfamiliar language. It had felt like something outside me, something that knew exactly which door to knock on. I found a Bible. I did not make a performance of it. I did not announce it. I just found one at a second-hand shop and brought it home and started reading, quietly, in the evenings, mostly the parts about Jesus. I do not know what I was looking for exactly. Confirmation, maybe, or contradiction. Something to settle the question one way or the other. What I found did not settle anything easily, but it did not feel foreign either. It felt like meeting someone I had heard described badly for years, and finding out the description was wrong. I went back to the community hall, weeks later, when things had dried out and the church families were back together doing repairs. I was not sure what I was going to say when I got there. I was not sure I needed to say anything specific. But the woman who had given me tea on that first afternoon saw me come through the door, and she crossed the room, and she hugged me before I could open my mouth. She smelled like paint and sawdust. She had been helping repaint the walls. I went back several more times after that, and each time I watched them the way I had watched them in the flood. Quietly, looking for the moment where the warmth would reveal its condition. Looking for the agenda. It was not there. They were just the same. The same on a Tuesday morning doing repairs as they had been on the worst night of the flood. the same with nothing at stake as they had been with everything at stake. That consistency broke something open in me more thoroughly than the flood itself had. My conversion was not fast. I want to be honest about that. It was not one night and one voice, and then everything changed and everyone was happy for me. It was months of reading, of asking questions I had been afraid to ask, of sitting with doubt, of praying in ways that felt uncertain and unfinished. It was arguments with people I love. It was losing friendships I had held for years. Friendships where the foundation turned out to be contingent on me being a particular kind of person. It was my mother going quiet on the phone, in a way that hurt more than any loud argument would have. It was my brother sending me articles he thought would change my mind. It was also, slowly, something opening up in me that I cannot describe any other way than as light. Not dramatic, not sudden, just gradually, over months, something that had been tightly closed beginning to open. There came a day when I made the decision clearly. Not emotionally, not in a crisis, not because someone persuaded me. Calmly, the way I make clinical decisions, by looking at the evidence in front of me and accepting what it points to. I decided to follow Jesus. I knew what it would cost. I counted the cost as carefully as I could. And then I made the choice. I changed as a nurse. I did not expect that part. I thought my faith change was a private internal thing, and my work was separate. But the patients I found, specifically with difficult patients, patients who are scared and impossible and rude because they are suffering and they do not know what else to do with it, that patience deepened in ways I could not explain and then stopped trying to explain. I started seeing frightened people differently. I started giving them more of what those Christian families gave me, presence without condition, warmth without a hidden line attached. I started forgiving faster, not perfectly, not every time, but faster than before, and from a different place. Years have passed now since the flood. Not many, but enough. I still notice when heavy rain starts. My body remembers before my mind catches up. I hear it on the roof, and something in my chest tightens for just a second. But then it loosens. Because what I think about first, when I hear that rain, is not the water, it is the singing. 18 families singing in the dark, with water at their chests, and children above their heads, and not a single thing guaranteed. I think about a jacket placed around my shoulders by someone who was already shaking. I think about food passed to the smallest ones first. I think about a voice I could not explain that found exactly the right words for the exact thing I was most afraid of. I spent years building a careful picture of who Christians were. I was so certain of it. I had collected evidence for it over such a long time, and then 18 families stood in a flood with me and dismantled every piece of that picture without trying to, without knowing they were doing it, just by being exactly who they were at their worst moment. I entered that building believing I was surrounded by strangers, people I needed to be cautious around, people whose kindness came with fine print. I left knowing I had been surrounded by people who showed me what the love of Jesus looked like. And through their kindness, and through a voice I heard when I had nothing left to offer and nowhere left to hide, I finally met the Jesus I had spent years refusing to know. If you're still here, thank you. That is not a small thing, staying with someone's story all the way to the end. I want to ask you something before you go. Whatever you are carrying right now, whatever question or grief or weight has been sitting with you, maybe longer than you want to admit, I want you to leave it in the comments. Not for me. For everyone here who will read it and pray over it. You do not have to write everything. You do not even have to explain it. Just write what you need. What you've been hoping someone would hold with you. Leave it there, and you will not be alone with it. That is the thing those families taught me without saying it in words. You do not have to carry the weight alone. You never did. I just did not know it until the water came.